The following is a GoPowercat.com production.
Man, the Big 12 Conference all year long was promoted and performed as the best conference in college basketball. No teams left and in the Final Four. Other conferences had several in the Elite Eight. Big 12 didn't have a great showing. We're here to talk about why this is the Big 12 Insiders.
Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
All right, welcome everybody back to the Big 12 Insiders. This is Big B, Brien Hanley, with Tim Fitzgerald from GoPowercat. Fitz, what's going on?
Nothing, man. It's so weird to have the Big 12 out of everything before the Elite Eight. Of all seasons, this was a worst case scenario for the Big 12. But I think as I look back, I might know why.
Yeah, we'll dig into it a little bit, but yeah, I was pretty surprised that nobody made it. Now, Houston kind of got a raw deal. Like I said, we'll dig into a little bit of this. And when I see a raw deal, it's not like they got cheated. It's, guy get hurt, that one of the best players in the country, not on your team. That has a little bit to do with why you don't advance. But we'll dig into that. Again, as always, everybody, Big 12 Insiders, Tuesday through Friday, 1 p.m. Please remember to go to our Big 12 page, our Big 12 Insiders page on YouTube. Go to that and go subscribe over there. We're just at 500 subscribers. We just crossed that threshold. So we're trying to get to 1,000 by football season so we can get some stuff moved over. So remember to go and subscribe. Tell all your buddies all that good stuff as well. So we appreciate it. Digging in here, Fitz. So let's just take a look. And let's start at the bottom as far as the Big 12 basketball season. Oklahoma State, obviously, they made a new hire. We'll get into a little bit of that tomorrow's show or on Thursday's show. So we'll talk about that. West Virginia, same thing. They got a new coach. We'll get into that a little bit tomorrow. As a whole, do we think that the Big 12 was overrated? Because that's what I keep hearing. I mean, we're starting at the bottom, moving up and talking about teams, but do we think it was a little bit overrated as a whole?
It obviously was. It really was. And my theory on this is pretty simple. First of all, there was new teams in the conference this year. Mm-hmm. So it kind of messed up our math, our understanding of, how the conference stacks up. And on top of that, the bell cow, the ultimate measurement of the Big 12, the Kansas Jayhawks, fell off.
Right.
And so right when we're in this transition to a new alignment of schools, Kansas has an uncharacteristic poor season. And I'm here to say maybe Kansas wasn't even as good as sixth place, but their home crowd got them over the hump by helping so much with some of those home games. And all of a sudden, our very basic understanding of how to measure how good teams are in the Big 12 was gone. As I look back now, Big B, maybe Houston was the only legitimate national title contender in the conference, and everyone else kind of fed off each other not being as good. I certainly think Iowa State was very good, but I think Houston might have been the only one that could contend. And as you mentioned, they got a bad injury at the worst time, and out they go.
Yeah, and I kind of think the same thing. Look, the national perspective or perception, I should say, of the Big 12 is always the measuring stick is Kansas. Kansas not any good. People are like, well, is the Big 12 really that good this year? It also didn't help the way that Kansas went out of the tournament, just absolutely getting slaughtered for everybody to see, even without one of their top players. But the bottom line is it just wasn't one of those years for Kansas this year. And that's okay. I mean, it happens. It happens with every good program. They have a down year. Now, the thing about it is they still won over 20 basketball games this year. It's not like they fell completely on their face. It just wasn't a typical Kansas year. And then if you think about the mid portion of the Big 12, it's like, okay, you have teams like Baylor. Was Baylor really that good? Because Baylor couldn't guard anybody. And that was kind of the thing with Baylor all season long and what people talked about. And then you get into the tournament and lo and behold, they're not making shots and they couldn't stop anybody and they get beat, Iowa State, no, they weren't in the middle. So let's not talk about Iowa State, but like a TCU, So inconsistent, up and down. BYU couldn't defend, not physical. And when they got into a game where a team out physicaled and didn't let them shoot threes, they looked lost. So it's as bad as we want to say. I know we don't want to say it about our conference because we love the conference, but yeah, I think the Big 12 this year, unfortunately, was overrated. I agree with you about Houston, the one legitimate team to win a national title. I think Iowa State may have been good enough to possibly get to a Final Four, but they weren't going to beat UConn. I mean, they just there was no chance they were going to beat UConn. I don't care what happened. They weren't going to beat them. And more than likely, they're going to get blown out by UConn.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the way the conference panned out this year just wasn't a great look.
Well, let's get maybe a little bit to the metrics. Every algorithm has a starting place. Every algorithm starts with some human putting in information. And if I'm a human putting in information on the net ratings or whatever, I put Kansas in, as a typical Kansas team because there wasn't that indication in the preseason that something was off. Now West Virginia beats Kansas early in the season, and all of a sudden all the ships start to rise to meet Kansas at where they're expected to be, not where they're actually at. I think that's how the Big 12 kind of gamed the system. The measurements of who they were playing and how they were playing against them were all thrown out of whack by the new conference. And what we said was highly competitive, which it was pretty mediocre competitive. Yeah. And as I watch some of these teams, certainly UConn, nobody's beating UConn.
Nope.
I should have spent more time watching UConn during the year to understand the Big 12 ain't what we think it is.
No.
And that's my failing, and I won't do that again. But the Big 12 just wasn't as good as we thought. And now next year, you got 4 new schools coming in, including Arizona. And, we kind of thought, Houston ran away from Kansas. They must be incredible. Well, they were actually what Kansas typically is. And then Arizona comes in and we'll see what they add. They can't get past the Sweet 16, but it's just going to make this conference even harder to figure out if it's really good or really average because it's going to be really competitive no matter what.
Correct. It's going to be really competitive. Next year will to me will be the telltale sign because the schools that we brought in before, look, UCF, Cincinnati, BYU, and Houston, we're not coming from Power 5 conferences. So outside of Houston, the step up, Cincinnati did okay. And maybe they had an outside shot of getting in. I said, but the others, they were on the outside looking in, while BYU usually has a decent team. And they were a decent team this year. Again, not competing in Power 5 conferences. It's just different, night in and night out. The other schools that are coming in, Colorado, Utah, Arizona State, they are used to that. Now, I'm not saying that, especially Arizona State, I'm not saying all of them are powerhouse teams or anything like that. I don't want to make that mistake. But at the same time, I do believe that they have the familiarity of competing against, Power 5 level competition on a night in and night out basis. I think that helps the conference, Fitz. I really do. I think that kind of, it gives us an advantage, not an advantage, but it just brings more credibility to the conference versus bringing in, it's teams from the American Conference. It just gives you a little bit more credibility.
Yeah. No, look, BYU was pretty good, but again, maybe their record was inflated because of a huge home court advantage. That's an amazing place to play basketball with, 18,000 fans. It's incredible. But they got out on the road, they got away from there, and they weren't as good. And unfortunately, in the men's game, you don't get to play home games in the tournament. And they didn't look very good. And it's just kind of it was an unfortunate timing, but I don't think there's any doubt that, the KU brand is unfazed by this. I mean, nobody's going to look at KU as a lesser thing now, though. I'll expect them to return to form next season, which I do. And yet in Houston, Arizona, and anyone else that can pop up there. I look back over the season, and the team I never bought in on all the way was Baylor. I kept trying to see what everyone was saying about them, but I just never think they looked awesome, and they weren't, as it turned out. So I think, some seasons we see the SEC football kind of survive on the feeling of that the whole conference is mighty when the middle of the conference is pretty average. Unfortunately for the Big 12 basketball, a lot of the conference was average. I mean, Kansas State was way down from what they were the year before.
Yeah. And I think that's partly, just what you said, top heavy, the middle of the conference, everybody thinks is good. And I'm not saying it wasn't good. Let me backtrack. The conference was good. It just wasn't as good as what everybody believed it to be.
Exactly.
And then when you get outside and you play against teams that you're not as familiar with, on a nightly basis, you kind of get a telltale sign. I mean, those coaches get paid too. They do scouting and they do all of that stuff. Other kids have scholarships out there as well. So you got to go compete. I think the Big 12, they competed, but at the same time, it's just, the one game that got away from me, TCU, I just thought TCU would put forth a better effort. But again, they were so up and down all year. And I think that was kind of the microcosm of the conference is that, yeah, they're okay, but not great. Texas, same thing.
Yep.
Texas had some of the best talent in the entire country. And I know we're not really talking Texas because, they're not in the Big 12 anymore, but they were. And again, some of the best talent just couldn't put it together. I think that TCU and especially Texas are kind of a microcosm of exactly what the conference was this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. They both showed flashes of being outstanding, but they couldn't do anything consistently with it and build off of it. There were a lot of teams in this conference that were capable of playing at a really high level that seemed to underperform on a regular basis. And that's something for the conference to really kind of worry about. What was that about?
Right.
I mean, and now you look back at some of the wins for UCF and West Virginia and Oklahoma State, and maybe even Kansas State, and you start to understand, well, those teams were capable of playing down any night. And it's just the opposite of what you want. You want your team capable of beating anyone on any night, and it worked the opposite way for the Big 12.
Yes, it absolutely did. I think getting back to I shouldn't say getting back, but getting that respectability back. Because look, it's going to take a hit next year because you know how the procrastinators and everybody that talks about college basketball is going to say the same thing. The Big 12 manipulated the net.
Right.
Look at the tournament; they weren't as good as what they were. In your eyes, Fitz, what's it going to take for the Big 12 to gain or basically get the respect back that a lot of Big 12 fans think that it deserves?
Go schedule in that non-conference. Go beat some teams. Go prove to yourself. And that's the biggest thing. I think right now the Big 12 needs to prove to itself that it is what it thinks it is.
Yeah.
I'd hope that everyone's going to schedule up a little bit. But, again, if the Big 12 did crack the net ratings and how they work, they'll do whatever that tends to tell them to do. And you know what? I know Jerome Tang from covering K-State isn't a big fan of the series with the Big East and previously the SEC, but I think that's a really healthy series for the Big 12 because the Big East, honestly, probably is the best conference, just part because of UConn being so good. But that gives them, one good game a year. K-State got Villanova. You'd normally think Villanova is a great measurement how good you are. K-State wins. Well, it turns out Villanova wasn't very good either.
Correct.
So I think a lot of things were off, and how we measure teams and what we think about teams. That's a lot of NIL in that, transfer portal in that. The deck's getting shuffled on us, and what we knew isn't what we know. And now we got to figure that out. But I look at a team like NC State that's in the Final Four as kind of a sign of what's going on in college basketball more than anything. I watched them play. I don't know how this team struggled in the ACC. I can't put my mind around how that kind of talent struggled, because that's a talented team. And now they're playing at that talent level. And maybe it just takes a while for some teams to kind of meld together in this era of so many transfers and working out the politics in the locker room of NIL deals. There's just so many moving parts now for these coaches to try to work with and balance and get the right chemistry. And certainly NC State found that.
Correct. I think some of I think you're right, working through some of the issues. Look, we know NC State we know the star of their basketball team. And I think that just watching several of their games this year, there were a lot of times where they didn't run their offense through him.
Right.
And in this NCAA tournament, and this run in general that they've had, including the ACC tournament, they have run their entire offense through him. Everybody else plays off of him. And I think that some of the guys finally figured out, you know what? We're going to be good. We just have to play off of him. Let him do his thing. And whatever we get, it's going to be off of him. Maybe one night I get 5 points. Maybe the next night I get 25 points. But whatever I'm going to do, it's going to be based off of him and what he can provide, because he's first of all, when you have an unselfish star, Fitz, that changes everything. And as we've seen in this tournament, he is an unselfish star. So let's take a quick break right here. We'll come back. We'll dive in and take a look at maybe the outlook, a little more of the outlook for next year for the Big 12 and what we think, what teams should step to the forefront. I know it's difficult because NIL, we don't even know what the teams are going to look like. But at the same time, it's always fun to look forward. So one word from our sponsor here, Synergy Financial Partners, and we'll be right back.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
All right, welcome back to the Big 12 Insiders. Again, it's Brien Hanley with Tim Fitzgerald from GoPowercat. So, Fitz, let's look a little bit towards the future here.
Yeah.
So, next year, as we mentioned, they're bringing in 4 new teams: Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. So, as we saw, Arizona State struggled. They've been struggling for a while. I'm not sure where they go, what they're going to do to be able to upgrade what they're currently doing. I know the whole thing is, you continue to do the same thing over and over and expect different results. The definition of insanity. I'm not sure how Arizona State justifies or continues to justify to continue down that road. I think we know what Arizona's going to bring. Colorado was a pretty good team this year, but they're losing a lot. So that's the thing about Colorado. They're losing a lot. So we'll see what happens there. They've had their coach, Tad Boyle's been there for a while. And Utah was just on the outside looking in. I think the Big 12 gets better. I just think they do. I think they get better. I think the teams that are currently in the conference, they're going to understand a little bit more on what's expected. They're going to get even better. Coaching changes at 2 places. I think the Big 12 may be in for a heck of a year next year.
I agree. I'm looking forward to it. The problem is trying to forecast in the future right now in a basketball environment is rosters are so volatile. You don't even know who's going to be on the team. In fact, at some teams, you don't even know who half the team's going to be.
Right.
There's that kind of turnover now and of players coming and going and the parts getting mixed up and who's got what. It's just, it's so hard, almost impossible to predict any kind of consistency. So you turn to the coaches and say, what have they done in the past? And I think we can agree that Bill Self will probably get KU righted. He'll figure out, how to do his thing in this current environment of college basketball. And of course, Kelvin Sampson is pretty consistent with Houston, and everyone else. Well, we'll find out. It's going to be throw those teams in a hat every season, I think.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Let's stick here with Kansas real quick. I think we kind of saw the vulnerability of what Kansas and what their issues were this year. And if we're just being honest, they had some misses, whether it was recruiting misses or more importantly, it was transfer portal misses where they brought in guys that thought they could help them and they couldn't. So, and you're going to have that from time to time. It's with the bell cow, and I'm fairly confident we can call Kansas the bell cow of the Big 12 because they have been for decades now. Bill Self, I just don't believe is going to, kind of what you mentioned, I have a hard time believe he's going to take this lying down.
Oh,
I think he was embarrassed by the way the season went. And and I think he pretty much said so in his, press conference, and where he thought he was thinking about the, next season a month ago. I think he was right when he said that. But I don't feel like he's going to take this lying down. I think Kansas may bounce back in a big, big way next year because Bill Self is just going to fix it.
I personally loved his honesty. I thought it was great. All of us have had phases of work that just kind of stink, and we think about, when this happens, it's going to be better. And he said it out loud. And of course, when you're struggling, you're going to start realizing, okay, I'm missing this piece and that piece, and I need better here and there, and start building a new team in your brain, what you need to have. He's going to go find that. And in an NIL world, Kansas will be well stocked. Those fans are going to pay into that NIL to make sure they continue to have great players. And I'm absolutely confident KU will be among the nation's best next year.
Speaking of NIL, and NIL in the transfer portal, I know we hit it a lot, but we should hit it a lot because it's important. It affects everything that's going on in college athletics right now. With the transfer portal and NIL, rosters are going to turn over. Do you think that, I don't know, 50% of rosters are going to change over within the Big 12? I was talking to somebody earlier today. He thought 50% was low. He thought it was going to be closer to 70% of when you take a totality of everybody's roster. He's thinking 70% is going to be different. There could be some transfers within the conference. He goes, but he thinks 70% is going to be different. You think that's a high number?
Well, that'd put us at about, 10, 11 teams are going to be shuffled. That might be right.
Yeah.
I mean, it really might be. You look at, and you know what? There's also an overreaction to, having a bad season.
Absolutely.
At some point, the coaches will realize we have to do the transfer portal and high school recruiting. We can't just do the portal. There's no stability in that. It's total chaos every season. You've got to start getting your own veteran guys to come up and, through the ranks and play them enough where they feel like they're part of the program, and they don't transfer out. You don't want to put a bunch of time into a player and then off they go. But yeah, right now everyone's trying to get great all of a sudden, and you absolutely can. You look at it, Alabama, they totally restructured their team with the transfer portal, and there they are. They had a great season. They're rolling. So it's the temptation now, and every coach thinks they're going to get it exactly right, and most of them don't.
No. And I think that's partly the deal, is that most of them do not. Or if you bring in guys and you think you're going to have this crazy season and you end up winning 18 games and you're like, well, what happened? Chemistry still matters, Fitz. Team chemistry still matters. And I know we talked about it before. It's hard to build some team chemistry, within a couple of months, especially when you don't have guys that maybe don't show up on campus until July, August.
Yeah.
It's tough to build some camaraderie and some chemistry. Now, it's a lot easier in basketball than it is in football, just because of the way things work. And, you don't have 11 guys that you're trying to move in the same direction doing something versus 5 on a basketball court. So it becomes easier, but I think you got to build some chemistry. I think you're hitting on the exact right place when you're talking about college. You have to recruit high school, and colleges have to start building that, because if you don't, what's the foundation? You can't have a program when your foundation is just transfer portal, because here's the thing, Fitz. What if one year you don't get the guys that you want? What if you build your entire program on, we're just going to go get 4 or 5 transfers every year? What if you get 2 that year? Because remember, people don't have to come to your school. And then we have 4 spots to fill out. We're just going to go grab anybody. Then what happens? Because I think coaches' jobs will start being in jeopardy if you start doing that.
Yep. You just can't have the constant turnover. Our friend K-Ned points out that Cyclones had a great season, and they just lost their hometown 4-star recruit, or 5-star recruit, hit the door and jumped into the portal because he didn't play enough. Well, the reality was he probably didn't look good enough to play. It wasn't advanced enough to play. But kids don't want to hear that. They're, they've been told they're the best their whole lives, and anything less than that is a lie. And that's another reality. You're going to have to play some guys that maybe you wouldn't normally play just to try to keep them around. It's a minefield for coaches. I don't know how they manage this, but that's really what it's about now, trying to maintain enough of a roster where you're not constantly flipping that roster. But Brien, this is how absurd the transfer portal has become, because there's nothing locking in kids to stay at the school unless they've taken class. And I don't even know if that does it anymore with all the court rulings. Kids are transferring, take Kansas State. Will McNair went to Providence, went on their overseas trip, played for the team on their overseas trip, gets back and says, this ain't for me, and transfers to K-State after just transferring to Providence. He's like Providence for what, a month, 2 months? It's absurd what's going on. And until kids actually are signing contracts of something binding that keeps them, the NIL and the transfer portal is going to be an absolute Wild West, a free for all, because the kids can just hop up. I mean, we just saw it happen with the offensive lineman we discussed on a previous show. Alabama, Iowa, going back to Alabama with $100,000 in his pocket. Until collectives start demanding contracts be signed and are binding, that they can claw back money if needed, then this is going to keep happening.
Yep, absolutely. They got to get it under control. Hopefully they do. I don't see now. I know we've talked about it before that Congress has to get involved and they got to pass laws because the NCAA is basically powerless because the courts have deemed them powerless. My thing is, collectives don't have to run by those same rules. Collectives can make you sign a contract if they want you to do that. Why won't more schools or their NIL programs? Why don't they just go to that, Fitz? I don't understand it.
I don't know. I don't know how you pay a kid basically a signing bonus with nothing binding them to tie them to the university or playing for the team. That's insanity. That's stupidity. Yeah. And you know what? That's just good for the kid. He took advantage of the system. I got no problem with it. He didn't do anything illegal. He fulfilled his obligations and signed and took the money and said, okay, well, I did everything I needed to do for that 100,000. I'm going back. It's sad, but funny at the same time.
Yeah. It's crazy to think that that's literally where we are in college athletics, to where we've got, I mean, they don't even do this in pros, at the pro level, Fitz. Guys don't go for 2 years or for 2 months and then say, you know what, thanks for the signing bonus, but I want to go back. I want to go to a different team. You don't even get that. But again, it all comes back to they're signing contracts at the professional level.
Yep.
Where here, there's no contracts. It's almost like somebody just handing you money and saying, I want you to do this. Okay, I'll do it. Give me the money. You give it to them. Thanks for the money, but I don't want to do that. It's absolutely insane. Let's take one more quick break and then we'll wrap this up. Again, one word from our sponsor, Synergy Financial Partners.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
All right, welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. Again, it's Brien Hanley with Tim Fitzgerald from GoPowercat. To wrap all this up, Fitz, the Big 12, like I said, it was disappointing. Look,
right.
Houston is the school that I feel the most bad for, because Houston had a chance.
They did.
Houston had a real chance not only to go to the Final Four, but to compete for a national title. And I know people are going to think, well, they lost in the Sweet 16 and this and that. But when you take away the best player on your team, the heart and soul of your team, your best defensive player, and he only plays 12 minutes in a game that you lose by 3 points because you can't figure things out on offense because the guy that got everything going for you, he's not there. It's tough. Yeah. I don't know another school or another team out there that can lose that guy. Maybe UConn. I'd say probably UConn, because UConn goes 10 deep, and it seems like all those guys are interchangeable. But at the same time, who else can go through that and still win? I don't know anybody else can, and I feel like Houston, of all the Big 12 teams, were really robbed of an opportunity.
I agree. I mean, it's just that unfortunate injury just led to the entire conference not looking as good. I'll just say this, Canelio got something there for us, but I'll just say this. I think the Big 12 is going to be fine, but we shouldn't fall for the trick that because everyone's beaten everyone within the conference, that means they're great. We're going to have to check ourselves on that in the future and make sure we understand exactly what's going on when we see BYU win at Kansas and those type of things.
Right. Let's pull up this question here from Canelio. Do either of you see the Cats, meaning K-State, adding a high school player late in this current class, or will just be portal entries? So I think if there's a player out there from anywhere that can help K-State, and this goes for anybody in general, I think you add them. I don't care where they come from, whether it's high school, portal. I think if there's somebody out there right now that can help you win and help you improve, I think you add them.
Yeah, absolutely. But unfortunately, this is a problem that coaches coming in have faced. There's not a lot of talent at this time of year.
Not this year. That's right.
I mean, it's just really difficult. But the portal gives schools a great opportunity to build when they have a new coach. We saw it happen at Kansas State. And but yeah, I don't think we're going to see as much bang from the high school ranks. And I feel bad for all these kids coming out of high school right now when the rules change, and maybe they're a 3-star that would have snuck into a Power 6 program, but now there's not room for them because those spots are being filled by transfer portal guys coming up from the non-power conferences. And now they've got to go down a level and have to prove themselves. Maybe it's a better way to do it, but I feel sorry that the rules change on these kids midstream.
Yeah. And the one thing that a lot of people say, and it's turning out, maybe it is true, that some of these lower division schools are now kind of being the farm system for these upper level schools, because all they're doing is they keep plucking these kids. They're plucking these kids. It's not fair. I don't think that there's a way, until something changes, it's going to continue down this path. And you're right. The 3-star kid that was getting to look at Marquette, going to Oklahoma State, all those guys, now they're having to go to a lower tier school. Doesn't mean they're a bad school. That's not what I'm saying.
No.
But it does mean it's a lower tier. Instead of going to Oklahoma State, now they're going to North Texas. And maybe they're there for 2 years. And then they go transfer to Mississippi State or something like that. That's what seems to be happening, is that if that's what we want with all of this, football, basketball, okay, I don't think that's the way that everybody wanted all of this to go, Fitz. Just my opinion.
No, mid-majors and lower have become the junior college system.
Yes,
essentially.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, but the players that aren't worthy of moving up can play 4 years. It's a weird position for those conferences. But as I mentioned, the benefit they see now is recruits they couldn't get earlier out of high school are probably ending up in the Missouri Valley, or certainly the Mountain West that we saw have such an incredible year this year. So there's still the talent out there. It's just distributing in different ways, and coaches at different levels have to manage their roster differently. It's until there's better structure put in place by someone of authority, we're going to be in this world.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Fitz, for taking the time to visit with us today. We appreciate it. We will be back tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Again, remember to like, subscribe, follow, all of that good stuff over at your Big 12 Insiders on YouTube. We appreciate everybody showing up. We will be back tomorrow to do it better.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.